Listed properties. Treasures of Britain's architectural landscape, are both a joy and responsibility to own. Discover the 6 factors really involved in caring for and improving a home with special status. Listed properties. Treasures of Britain's How does the listing process work? How do you find out if a property is listed? How are listed buildings graded? How will listing affect the owner? What can you do with your listed building? Grade 2 listed building regulations. How does the listing process work? Introduction. Listed buildings are buildings officially defined as being of special architectural or historic interest. A building is listed when it is of special architectural or historic interest, considered to be of national importance and therefore worth protecting. As the term implies, a listed building is actually added to one of the 3 lists. The National Heritage List for England. Historic Environment Scotland's list of buildings. The list of buildings of special architectural or historic interest for Wales or the Northern Ireland Buildings Database. Since all are a list of buildings of historic or architectural significance, they are called listed buildings. In theory, this protects them from being inappropriately modified or poorly maintained by any current or future owners. Listing brings the building under the consideration of the planning system, so that it can be protected for future generations. Buildings are listed in their entirety, inside and out, even though some parts may be more important than others. The older a building is, and the fewer the surviving examples of its kind, the more likely it is to be listed. The general principles are that all buildings built before 1700 which survive in anything like their original condition are likely to be listed. Most listed buildings built between 1700 and 1850. Buildings less than 30 years old are not normally considered to be of special architectural or historic interest because they have yet to stand the test of time. The 621 listed buildings in the national park range from palaces and country houses to many smaller but more typical cottages and hovels built of brick, timber frame or cob. Determining the area of land attached to a listed building and forming one enclosure with it, is not a simple matter. The main test is the physical layout of the land at the date of listing and the relationship of objects or structure to each other. Factor number 1. How does the listing process work? There are 2 main routes to listing. Anyone can nominate a building to be listed and government has its own strategic program of listing priorities. In both cases recommendation is made to the Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport based on principles of selection for listed buildings, and they make the final decision as whether a site should be listed or not. Factor number 2. How do you find out if a property is listed? To find out if a property is listed, just search one of the 3 lists mentioned before. The National Heritage List for England, the Historic Environment Scotland's list of buildings, and the list of buildings of special architectural or historic interest for Wales or the Northern Ireland Buildings Database. Factor number 3. How are listed buildings graded? The listing categories vary across the UK. England and Wales have 3 main grades, 1, 2** and 2. Grade 1 buildings are of exceptional interest. Only 2.5% of listed buildings are Grade 1. Grade 2** buildings are particularly important buildings of more than special interest. About 6% of listed buildings are Grade 2*. Grade 2 buildings are of special interest. 92% of all listed buildings are in this class, and it is the most likely grade of listing for a homeowner. The categories in Scotland are A, B and C, while in Northern Ireland they're A, B+, B1 and B2. It is estimated that there are around 500,000 listed buildings on the National Heritage List for England. Factor number 4. How will listing affect the owner? Listing is not a preservation order, preventing change. It does not freeze a building in time. It simply means that listed building consent must be applied for in order to make any changes to that building which might affect its special interest. Grade 2 listed buildings are subject to regulations which protect their historical and architectural significance. These buildings are of special interest, meaning alterations and building work can't be carried out without written consent from the relevant authorities. Local planning authority should be able to supply a copy of the list description. The amount of detail in the description varies, and just because a particular feature is not mentioned, does not mean it is not legally protected. Other structures within the surrounding land or curtilage of the building may also be included, such as garden walls and even paving. Factor number 5. What can you do with your listed building? Listed buildings are to be enjoyed and used, like any other building. Listed buildings can be altered, extended and sometimes even demolished within government planning guidance. The local authority uses listed building consent to make decisions that balance the site's historic significance against other issues, such as its function, condition or viability. If you have bought a listed building, you will need consent before you alter the property in any way. Changes usually require planning permission from your local authority, but listed buildings can also require listed consent. Depending on what grade your listed building falls under, there will likely be more controls or restrictions on what you can and cannot change. Factor number 6. Grade 2 listed building regulations. Regulations and consent involved in buying and renovating listed buildings. If you have fallen in love with a listed building, and are thinking of buying, renovating and living in it, you might want to be familiar with the rules and regulations that surround what you can and cannot do with the property. Over 92% of all listed buildings in the UK are Grade 2, so chances are, your property falls into this category. Listed building consent. It may seem strange to need consent to make alterations to your own home, but this heritage protection is designed to make sure that our built environment, and your dream home, maintains its unique character. Carrying out works on a listed property without consent is a criminal offence, which can carry serious penalties. Not only will you have to pay to restore the building, you might also be liable for unlimited fines and even time in prison. Consent must always be applied for through local authorities before material changes are made to listed properties. If consent is granted, owners are required to pay a listed building consent fee. The amount will vary depending on the scale of the project. Unanticipated costs are associated with owning a Grade 2 listed building. Listed building insurance will help to make sure that no matter what happens, you can respond to the specialist needs of your building responsibly. Also, grants are available for the repair and maintenance of historic sites. When is listed building consent required? Listed building consent is required if you wish to make significant material changes to the property. Changes can include listed building repairs. Repairs to listed buildings may require consent depending on whether it is considered that the work would affect the character of the building. Often, a repair made with like-for-like materials will not need consent. This is not always the case, however, and it's best to seek advice from local authorities. Internal alterations. Listed building status applies to the entirety of the building, so internal works and alterations also require planning consent. This not only applies to changing the plan of rooms by, for example, removing a wall. It also includes demolishing and rebuilding features, exposing timbers and brickwork, installing double glazing, removing internal features, like fireplaces and paneling, renovations and extensions. The charm of a listed building is hard to resist, but for many homeowners so is the desire to make their mark on a property. Making renovations and extensions to a listed building is a careful process, one which demands patience, planning and attention to detail. Bottom line: the advantages and disadvantages of owning and living in a listed building. The truth is that living in a listed building is a responsibility as well as a pleasure, a burden as well as a privilege. Advantages. A listed home can become a source of great pride that enables you to help preserve Britain's architectural heritage. Knowing that you live in or own a historical building is a great feeling. You are one of the privileged few people who gets to enjoy being a part of history. A listed building typically appreciates in value more than other properties. It is almost unknown for a listed property to depreciate unless it's been seriously damaged. Disadvantages. Listed buildings are expensive to insure. As rebuild costs are higher for listed properties, the average insurance quote is also fairly high. Every renovation job takes 4 times as long and costs 6 times as much. Listed buildings are old, and even if you don't plan to make any alterations, mere maintenance can be a drain on time and money. Any renovations that would alter the original building to its detriment would not be approved. You may or may not be able to make alterations or renovations to the property. You must first obtain approval of Historic England or your local conservation officer. Due to recent government cutbacks, grants for listed buildings are now much more difficult to obtain. However, you're more likely to be awarded a grant if your property is a Grade 1 or Grade 2 * listed property. Restoration, whether inside or out, can be an expensive affair. Essential repairs or renovations that have been approved must be undertaken using the same construction methods and materials that were used when the building was originally built. If your local authority is considered that you are not properly preserving the building, it has the authority to serve you with a repairs notice and to issue a compulsory purchase order if you do not comply. Thank you for watching the video. If you watch all my lectures, you may be able to start investing in rental properties a little quicker. Please subscribe to my channel and press the bell to get alerts when a new video is posted. Please write your comments, questions, or concerns you would like to share.